At first glance, this bedroom looks completely normal. There is no weapon, no sign of a struggle, and absolutely no body. But investigators are about to discover a scene of horrific violence hidden right beneath their feet. The room belonged to 24-year-old Scott Dunn. He was a fun-loving guy who enjoyed life in Lubbock, Texas, where he shared an apartment with his living girlfriend, Leisha Hamilton. In May of 1991, Scott was at an after-work party with friends when he suddenly became violently ill. He went home to sleep it off and vanished without a trace. According to Leisha, Scott spent a couple of days in bed recovering. She told police that he eventually felt well enough to go back to work, walked out the door, and just never came back. With no body and no obvious signs of foul play, this looked like a standard missing persons case. People walk away from their lives all the time, and the complete lack of physical evidence gave whoever was responsible a protective cover, freezing the investigation in its tracks. The first crack in that cover appeared when investigators searched the apartment. They noticed a large, square piece of carpet had been cut out and removed from directly underneath the living room sofa. That missing square hadn't been thrown away. It was used to carefully patch a section of carpet right in the corner of Scott's bedroom. When police lifted that makeshift patch, they found a massive rust-colored stain. Blood had soaked heavily through the padding underneath, straight down to the concrete floor. The entire patch was held together with duct tape, and the nearby baseboards looked like they had been recently scrubbed clean with water and detergent. But even with this grisly discovery, the district attorney wouldn't file a murder charge. At the time, Texas law relied on a strict legal principle called corpus delicti. It meant that to officially prove a homicide occurred, authorities had to produce a physical body. Without Scott's remains, the state couldn't move forward. The killer had managed to halt the justice system, not by keeping the scene entirely pristine, but by exploiting a legal loophole and making the victim disappear entirely. A full year passed with no arrests. Frustrated by the dead end, Scott's father, Jim Dunn, took the case to Philadelphia. He presented his son's file to the Duct Society, an exclusive group of international forensic experts who specialize in unsolved murders. The group's co-founder immediately saw a path forward. He sent the crime scene photos across the Atlantic to a forensic pathologist at Scotland Yard in London. After reviewing the patterns on the walls and floors, the pathologist concluded that Scott had been the victim of severe blunt force trauma, specifically right there in the corner of his bedroom. Armed with this analysis, profiler Richard Walter took a novel legal argument back to the district attorney. He pointed out that medically speaking, blood is connective tissue. Therefore, finding a massive amount of blood means you've actually found a piece of the victim's body. The prosecutor agreed. By legally redefining the bloodstain as a literal body part, they finally bypassed the corpus delicti roadblock, giving investigators the legal ammunition they needed to pursue a murder charge. Now police just had to prove the attack was fatal. When investigators sprayed the bedroom with luminol, a chemical that detects hemoglobin even after it's been washed, a massive glowing bloodstain appeared right where the floor and baseboards had been scrubbed. To figure out exactly how much blood Scott lost, forensic expert Tom Bevel conducted a saturation test. He poured blood onto a test piece of carpet padding to reverse engineer the exact volume needed to create a stain of that specific size. To create the 266 square inch stain found in the apartment and to soak completely through the padding to the concrete below, it took nearly 2 entire units of human blood. Losing 2 units of blood in a single, sudden, violent event is a lethal volume. This mathematical proof confirmed Scott could not have survived the attack. The violence of the event was also written on the walls. The blood spatter pattern showed 3 distinct lines of cast-off, indicating the killer swung a blunt weapon a minimum of 4 times. By mapping the physical destruction and calculating the exact volume of blood lost, forensic science successfully reconstructed the death, completely replacing the need for a physical corpse. With the crime confirmed, investigators looked closely at Tim Smith. He was a deeply religious neighbor who had become wildly infatuated with Leisha. When detectives visited Tim's apartment to ask a few questions, they noticed he was packing up to move. While they were talking, a detective caught Tim actively trying to hide a roll of duct tape behind some books. That tape was immediately sent to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. There, analysts used a technique called infrared spectrophotometry, which passes infrared light through a material to measure how different wavelengths are absorbed. This chart shows the chemical breakdown of the materials. The infrared spectrum proved that the exact fibers, backing, and adhesive of Tim's tape perfectly matched the tape used to conceal the bloody carpet patch. The side of that roll held even more microscopic evidence. Stuck to the adhesive edge were green, triangular-shaped nylon fibers identical to Scott's bedroom carpet, right alongside strands of hair matching both Tim Smith and Leisha Hamilton. A single, mundane object, a roll of hardware store tape, now physically tied both suspects to the exact center of the hidden crime scene. The physical evidence finally exposed the motive. Leisha recently discovered that Scott was secretly engaged to another woman, and she decided to execute a brutal revenge. Using her influence over the smitten Tim Smith, Leisha manipulated him into helping her carry out the murder, striking Scott while he slept in his own bed. 5.5 years after Scott vanished, prosecutors secured a massive legal victory. Relying entirely on microscopic traces, volume tests, and blood spatter, they convicted both suspects of murder without ever producing a body. Leisha Hamilton, identified as the mastermind, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Tim Smith, acting as her accomplice, received 10 years of probation. The sheer, undeniable weight of that forensic evidence crushed the legal protections of what was meant to be a flawless cover-up. But this scientific victory still leaves a glaring, painful void. Scott Dunn's body remains missing to this day. His father, Jim Dunn, continues to carry the weight of that loss. He has a headstone waiting, marking an empty grave, hoping that someone will eventually talk so he can lay his son to rest. Forensic technology can reconstruct a crime scene. It can bypass legal walls, put killers in prison, and speak for those who have been silenced. But without the physical return of a son, it cannot fully heal a father's loss.